Coming up, how and why Craig created a platform using AI that makes investigating crime and creating briefs of evidence much simpler, enabling police, business and governments to bring people to justice. Craig, having left the job in around 2016, there or thereabouts, you founded a software company called Comtrac, which now employs over 30 staff. Can you just discuss the origins of this and what Comtrac does?
When I moved down to Brisbane, I started working through your various major crime units, like I guess your drug squads, fraud squads, your organised crime unit, and so on. And I'd worked there for about 10 years. I had about 20 years overall in the police. But one of the things that I found is that when we were doing those major investigations, we were gathering a lot of information over maybe a 3-month or a 6-month period, and then we'd make an arrest, and then we were practically offline for anywhere between 3 to 6 months building briefs of evidence. And the reason for that was that when we were running our investigations, we had nowhere to really put the evidence, except for sticking it in a file server and a folder. At some point, we're going to come back and look through it, and then we're going to build our brief evidence. And because the world had evolved a lot, even back about 2010, 2011, I tried to get our IT section to build us what we called an e-brief, an electronic brief of evidence. I said, we need something that as we take a witness statement, or as we do an interview, or as we get a photograph, or as we get some sort of an analysis sample, we want to basically put it into a system, map the evidence to the elements of the offence, and then automatically build that brief evidence as we progress through the investigation. Because if we don't, then suddenly the whole criminal justice process is just delayed. Like once we make our arrests, we're supposed to get our brief evidence to the court as soon as possible so they can commence proceedings. But it ended up being months and months, and there was adjournment, and then of course, because we weren't really working around proving the elements of the offence, we're just, let's prove the offence, the prosecution was always going, hey, you're missing this or you're missing that. So I wanted our IT department to build us a platform that as we got evidence, we can map it to the points of proof for what we're trying to prove, and it would build this brief evidence automatically, and we could see what was proven or not proven, because that would give us a real strategic direction for the case, our lines of inquiry. It would give us a 360 transparency of the case. So as it turned out, they did actually say, that sounds like a great idea, and they gave me one IT person, and he tried to build something in Microsoft Access for us, and it just went nowhere. And in saying that, like, they had committees around this. There was a lot of buy-in for it, and at one point, I just went, this is just not going to happen. As a government agency, we just don't seem to have the drive to do it. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to have a crack at this. This just makes so much sense. I mean, I could turn a 6-month investigation into maybe 3-month investigation, or I could take 6 to 12 months of brief preparation and have a whole brief ready in a week or two after the arrest. I thought, surely this makes sense. So I decided to take some time off. I ended up resigning because I really got passionate about it. And of course, one of the mistakes I made was, if you are an entrepreneur with a really good idea, if you want to survive and build it really rapidly, your client base must not be government, because they do not move very fast at all. The procurement cycles are long, they're very risk adverse, no one wants to try anything really new and exciting. So we spent about 2 years building this prototype of our e-brief, our electronic brief evidence, a platform that as investigators were putting their statements in, it was building this brief automatically. And then I was at a conference, I think it was Environmental Regulators Conference, and I gave a presentation on this prototype that we'd done. And then I got approached by New South Wales Mine Safety, because they do investigations into work health and safety legislation. One thing to keep in mind, that criminal investigations are not limited to just police forces, right? You've got your environment protection agencies, your race integrity commissions, your health government agencies, transport. They all have legislation they administer, and if people breach that legislation, then they can get charged in criminal. So they've all done it. So we had New South Wales Mine Safety go, it looks like a great idea, let's do it. And that was kind of like 10 years ago. And they were our first client, and they are still with us today. And since then, we have rolled out our platform out across Commonwealth, state government agencies, a couple of small overseas APAC law enforcement agencies, and we end up having about 34 clients on the books now. But the one thing that always eluded me were the police departments, because the vision for me was for police, right? It was my background. When I left the police, I had no problem with it. I loved working the police. I really enjoyed it, but I just had this idea that I was sure it was going to work. And I guess it wasn't until, it was early 2024, or maybe late 2023, we'd started applying AI across our platform. And the best way to describe it is at the core of our platform is something called the investigation matrix. In its earlier version, the investigators would link an exhibit to an element of the offence, and they would actually describe what is the evidence in that exhibit that proves that element. So they still had to do that manually. And from that point on, then our software was building this brief evidence automatically in the background. It's mapping the evidence, linking the witnesses, building the briefs, even convert all the exhibits to PDF and create a hard copy file or electronic one. In late 2023, we decided to put AI services across our investigation matrix, which meant instead of the investigator looking through a witness statement or a 100-page transcript or 1,000 pages of financial records or body-worn camera video, whatever the case may be, we got the AI services to look through it. And we train the AI service and when you train it, you're basically teaching it, you are an investigator who works for law enforcement government agency. This is your role. Find evidence to prove the elements of the offence, create summary narratives, and help me build this brief evidence. So we spent a good 6 months sort of configuring and training this AI model. Then we ran it across our investigation. And then we started talking to clients and everyone got really excited. So this is going to save thousands of hours. And then as it turns out, the Queensland Police had heard about what we were doing. Now, they had another unique problem, which was focused on domestic violence. In the same way that I always thought about, we take too long to build brief evidence, the police were going out to domestic violence incidents. They were recording the conversations between the respondent and the aggrieved and police on their body-worn cameras. Then they had to come back to the station, and they were spending anywhere from 3 to 4 hours going through their notes, going through the body-worn camera video, typing up a domestic violence application, which was quite specific. There was certain things they had to put in that application to meet the legislative requirements, evidence requirements, to allow the courts to take out a domestic violence order. And of course, if it's taking you 3 or 4 hours to do that back at the station, the reality is if you're out the scene for an hour, you got 3 or 4 hours of paperwork, and then you have to serve something, your whole shift is gone. And the police were finding that their frontline capacity was being smashed. Most crews were going to 1, if not 2 domestic violence incidents a shift. They weren't being able to respond to other matters. There are some areas, I saw an article in the Courier Mail about Logan, who someone had leaked a screenshot showing 40-odd, I think, domestic violence incidents the police had just not been able to get to. So the Queensland Police approached us and said, we've heard what you're doing with AI around briefs evidence. Could you do this for our domestic violence applications? And of course we said, well, yeah, we can. It's like we just tell our AI service that you are building a domestic violence application. This is what you need to look for. So now instead of them doing 3 or 4 hours building these particular domestic violence applications, they come back to the station, we import the body-worn camera footage into Comtrac. The AI will go across, say, 2 hours of body-worn camera video, and in 30 seconds, it will build that domestic violence application, which means the officer just now has to go through it and read it. And there are a few protocols built in the software they have to accept and understand that AI is there to assist but not replace, and they have to acknowledge that they've been through it. But in reality, they turned about 3 or 4 hours of work into maybe 15 to 20 minutes. So it's like a 75 to 80% increase in how efficient they are. There have been so many articles about, and not just Queensland Police, almost every state, where their frontline capacity is really stretched. Their attrition rate of police is getting higher and higher. Some states like Victoria have about 2,000 vacant positions. The problem is, if you're going to fix that frontline capacity, you've either got to employ hundreds of more police or thousands more police, or you have to find a way to do things more efficient. And we did a proof of concept with the Queensland Police. They ran live trials of this software, and they finished late last year, so it hasn't been deployed across the state or anything yet, and certainly we're still going through negotiations in that space. But the reality is, if we can make frontline police, say, 40% more efficient, if you've got a frontline uniform capacity of, say, 9,000 police, that's the equivalent to putting about another 3,000 something police on the road on the hours that they save. So instead of trying to fix frontline capacity with employing more police, if you just work smarter and be more efficient, then you can fix that problem in a way that you couldn't have dreamed of just by employing more police. So it's a really exciting time for us. The proof of concept went so well, I got invited down to Victoria, where I gave a presentation to assistant commissioners from every state in Australia and New Zealand about the work that we've done with the Queensland Police. And since that, I've had meetings with the police ministers' offices. In fact, I've got another one in another state coming up in about 2 weeks' time. I've got New South Wales Police. We're setting up people to see us to see what we've done with Queensland Police. And I think it's one of those areas where people are always going on about the good and the bad and the ugly about AI. But if you can get AI to do some of the heavy lifting on the administration of policing, that is the paperwork, the stuff that keeps us in the office instead of out of the road, then it's a really good use case for it. And AI it's never going to be perfect, but let's face it, the genie's out of the box here. It's not going away. And if you don't leverage it and take advantage of it now, then you're going to be well behind everyone else.
As an old ex-copper sitting here listening to this, we were talking off air, comparing how things used to be to this. I mean, this is a massive, massive leap forward. And on so many levels, I mean, you take yourself back to being that young 18, 19-year-old copper going to the academy. No copper goes into the police academy to do paperwork. That's not the dream. And, we're just chatting about this application to domestic violence. And, of course, there are going to be much wider applications for all sorts. I mean, when we look at high-level investigations of homicide, things like that, it could greatly, greatly reduce the man-hours with regards to, the laborious sort of paperwork, briefs of evidence and things such as that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you talk about that, because I always had this thing when I was in the police, like especially as a detective going to a crime scene, I always thought, wouldn't it be really cool if, like Sherlock Holmes, like you walk into a room and things just pop out at you. You could see what no one else could see. Glow in the dark, and you'd find it and no one else could see it. And they go, you're just an amazing investigator, detective, Craig. That's fantastic. How do you do that? And I remember when we were deploying our first round of AI, and of course it wasn't just around domestic violence, it was around any exhibits, any evidence, financial records. And suddenly that AI was doing exactly what I'd always dreamed of as if I could do myself. It was seeing things that I couldn't see. It was finding it in rapid amounts of time. It was summarizing the evidence. It was saying, look, if you're looking for how to prove this offence, I've already done it for you. You just need to go through, confirm what I've come up with, confirm those exhibits are there, and we're done. So here's your evidence. Now let's have a look at another crime. I always think of it like that whole concept of being as clever as Sherlock Holmes. And suddenly I've got Sherlock Holmes in my pocket and I can take him with me for any investigation I do now. And he's going to do all that work for me. And I just have to go through and review it, confirm it, and then we'll be streamlining the criminal justice process in like no time at all.
I read through your bio, Craig. I think you've got quite an affinity with Sherlock Holmes as a young bloke. It's part of your pathway into the police. So it's quite interesting that your pathway out has reconnected. That I think even I think I'm right in saying the famous, and if I get it wrong, my apologies. The famous quote, "It's elementary, my dear Watson." I think links to a trademark of one of your software products, does it not?
So that's true. It's a bit corny, but so we call it elementizing evidence. Is what I call the methodology behind our platform. And yeah, unfortunately, it's a bit cheesy, but it does kind of come from that thing. It's elementary, my dear Watson. There's an interesting story about that whole term, elementizing evidence. I actually gave a presentation of Comtrac to the Director of Public Prosecution's office, and I was talking about this concept of elementizing evidence. And I remember the Director of Public Prosecutions said, now, elementizing is not actually a real word, don't you, Craig? I said, yeah, I know, I made it up. But I said, but you Google it now, and it starts coming up everywhere. I said, there's nothing cooler than potentially creating your own verb, right? Kind of like Uber. I'd love to have my own verb out there. So it's like, oh, how do you build your briefs? Well, we elementize it. How do you do it?
Yeah. Look, just to come back to that DV stuff, domestic violence, because this is such a massive part of policing. Some of the listeners may be surprised here. You mentioned Logan, where perhaps in one shift there were 40 domestic violence cases that were red jobs on the go that couldn't be attended to. We know here, for example, in New South Wales, here in Sydney, west of Sydney, up to 70% of jobs attended by general duties police are domestic violence jobs. If we just apply this process that you're talking about just purely to domestic violence alone and nothing else, that's just going to free up so much more with regards to having police on the roads doing what the communities want them to do, to be there, to attend jobs, and also possibly take away from some that reluctance to take a few steps down that process because they know they're going to be stuck back in the station in the muster room for the rest of the shift having to go through paperwork.
The problem is generally when things go bad, especially in the frontline policing, police are always the punching bag. The reality is it's generally not their fault. Often it's just resourcing and the process that have been put in place to actually do things. When we ran that proof of concept with the Queensland Police, the feedback that they were sending back was the AI was picking up things that I'd forgotten. So it's picking up evidence and comments that they can use to justify an application that they'd forgot, because there's a lot of emotion going on at those scenes. They're not always, everyone's talking nicely to each other. Oh, we just had an argument. Don't worry about it. And so to have to remember everything that was said without the assistance of going through that video is really difficult. And the pressures are on police to get those applications right and have all the information in it. Because, and we've heard it before in the news, right? There people get issued domestic violence orders, what do they call it in other states? I think AVOs. And there might be one or two, and then sometimes it's led to a homicide or someone being killed or seriously hurt. So it's important right from the start they get it right to start with, right? And some of the feedback we got from the Queensland Police, the proof of concept was, like I said, number one, the AI is picking up things that I hadn't thought of. But they also said things like the pressures that have been taken off me, knowing that this was going to be done initially by AI and me just to review it, it meant I could spend more time with the actual aggrieved at the scene. Because I knew that I wasn't going to be 3 or 4 hours of my shift doing paperwork. I could spend more time there. And there's some of the feedback that we hadn't really thought of when we were running it. So it was interesting to get that sort of feedback as well, where the pressures have been taken off them. And the reality is, again, police attrition rate is high across the whole country in every state. And where it used to be like a career, the police, you join when you're 19 and a lot of people go through to 50 or 60, right? That's not happening anymore. You've got young police are coming into the job, they're going on the road in their first year and they're going from domestic violence incident to domestic violence incident, been sitting in front of computers doing 3 or 4 hours of paperwork, and at some point they go, this is not what I thought it was. And that's the reality of it. We've got to do things a bit better. I mean, we need to have police freed up to be back on the front line. Look, I remember when I was in the Cairns Police, you'd be driving around 3/4 your shift just hoping to get a job. But we're always out in the street, right? And then you get one and you'd be back at the station. Now you just don't see police out on the road anymore because they're just drowning in paperwork and processes. I don't know about you, but I rarely see a uniform marked car when I drive to work and drive home again. It's a change pace.
We go back to our day, we had typewriters, which some of the younger listeners wouldn't even know what we're talking about, and we had to do typing tests at the academy. Those were the days where you'd do an interview of a suspect and you would actually record the interview in handwriting, by hand, because none of us were good enough typists to be able to type as they were chatting. And you'd send that handwritten statement upstairs to the typing pool. And in our station, the person who could put the best briefs together was the head typist, because she does it for everybody. And so what you sent up would be all changed, and it'd be like your school teacher, your English teacher going through and changing all your words and all your spelling mistakes. And so to sit here and to listen to what you've done and the connection to AI, it's really quite incredible. I mean, it's a massive leap forward that we've taken in a relatively short period of time, the last 4 or 5 years. And I think you're right. There is a reluctance, a fear, a lack of knowledge around AI, and we tend to emphasize the potential bad sides of and all that type of thing. But this really puts a spotlight on some real positive stuff, doesn't it?
I was on a panel last year for the ANSPA conference, which is the National Australian New Zealand Policing Association conference. It's one of the biggest policing conferences in the country. And I was invited to be a part on an emerging technology panel. And of course, we talked about what we had done with the Queensland Police Project. We spoke about that and use of AI to streamline all this administrative paperwork. And at the end of it, they invite us to say a couple more closing remarks. And my comments were that throughout the conference, I'd heard a lot about AI, and I heard a lot of people saying how it can be used really well, but there was a lot of people talking about where it falls short or why they're reluctant to go down that path. And I said to them at the end of that panel, to my closing address, was that if I came to you and I said, I've got the cure for cancer, but I can only cure about 90% of it, would you really tell me, go away until it's absolutely perfect? We're not interested, because there's a risk that 10% of it might not survive. And of course, the answer was, well, no. You'd say, yeah, if we can save 90% of people from cancer, let's just do it. And AI it's not that much different. It's like, it's not going to be perfect, but if we can make you 90% more efficient, and that other 10% just means you've got to have some things in places to check it, to accept that it's there to assist. It's not going to be perfect, and let it do some of the heavy lifting. You're going to be far better off. And if you sit back and go, no, I'm not going to do this until maybe 10 years down the track where AI has been proven to be perfect, then imagine all the I guess, the opportunity costs that are going to have been lost to your agency in that period of time. And yeah, so it's something. Look, so when we built our platform, we purposely watched carefully all the national frameworks for government using AI. We have built our AI platform around those national frameworks, and they're not that complicated. It's really just about making sure the human is involved. There's an audit trail of where the AI got the result from. Human has to sign off on it. That you can control your model through configuration in the back end, all that sort of stuff, and it's all there and it's growing. And look, I couldn't be more excited about the benefits it can bring to the community, to law enforcement, and that whole dream that I have of streamline the criminal justice process, which is where it all started. It's like it's so real now, and it's just on our doorstep that we can make things better. Potentially, in due course, we'll start putting a few of those defence criminal lawyers out of work, or just get them a little bit of work at the end.
And, you know, to me, too, there's a parallel, and it's probably a bit of a clunky one, but there's a parallel here to, again, back in the day, where police records, police databases went from being basically hard copy paper to being computerised. So you could drive around in a patrol car, you could do a QVR, query vehicle registration on the run, you could put it through to dispatch, and they could come straight back who the owner was with any warrants or anything like that. Where a couple of years prior to that, that would be a message that was sent back to the station, then a message to somebody who would go and find the file and go through it, and then eventually sort of get back to you. So computerising the policing system back in the 80s, it didn't create knowledge that didn't exist. It just expedited and streamlined the process. Is that a reasonable parallel to what we're seeing now in your system with AI? It's not creating anything that doesn't exist. It's just expediting and streamlining a process which has become a bit clunky.
I guess when you think about it, even before AI, everyone was using Google to look up things, right? They're looking for answers through Google. In its own way, Google's doing a lot of the work of researching for you anyway and giving you some information back, and then you had to do something with it. So AI in its own ways is almost like Google on steroids. It's not only is it doing that research for you, it's got access to information, but it's putting it back in a way that's easy to digest and that you can actually utilize it. The benefits of it are just, you can't argue with it. If you're coming up with arguments why you should never use it, especially in law enforcement, then you're probably making it up. It all comes down that the human has to own the result, right? So at the end of whatever the AI brings back to you, you've got to accept the unit. So the risk is that the human at the other end won't read it and won't look at it and will save it, even though they've passed all the acknowledgement gateway saying, I've read it and all sorts of stuff. And you know what? That potentially will happen anyway. Like, there's all different people. Some people like to take shortcuts. One of the key things we did when we factored into Comtrac is, like, technically speaking, we could get our platform, and it doesn't because we purposely didn't go as to look at all the evidence being gathered and just build the brief in its entirety for you. But we purposely don't do it like that. We basically go, you take one exhibit, the AI will look at that, it'll map it against the elements of the offence, you read it, and you move on to the next one. Because if we just said select all exhibits and do the mapping, that's what's going to happen. People will get lazy and they won't read it properly. So you've got to maintain that risk, right? So we purposely don't allow it to do that. That risk has always existed with humans, right? They'll come up with something, create a court brief and arrest brief. They'll put a summary of what they think they know about the investigation and put it to court. And often they're taking shortcuts there as well. But sure, what I can tell you is that the one thing about the AI, especially if, like, you've got to configure it right, you've got to make sure it's said, you can't hallucinate, this is your role, whatever you come back to, circle back in, double check it, and bring me back a reference where it came from. Once it's doing that, at least you know your AI is not making anything up. It's factual. It's like having that investigative partner working with you who knows absolutely everything there is to know about this case. You know, because me as an investigator, I might know a lot of it, but I'm unlikely to know everything. Whereas my AI partner knows absolutely everything about this investigation, every word spoken, every exhibit taken, every fact and figure, and it will find evidence quicker and present evidence a lot faster than I can do it. And it can even do it without any opinions. I don't know about you from your history, but sometimes you went to court and then the defence going, I'm not interested in your opinion, detective. And you go, you're right, that was my opinion. Whereas your AI, again, it's configured to make sure it just states the facts, leaves out any opinion-related matters. It just makes sense.
Craig, I just want to thank you so very much for joining us via our studio up there in Queensland. Craig, it's not only talking about your time in the police, and can I just say too, the 22 years, thank you for your 22 years of service to the good people of the state of Queensland, but also at the back end of the chat there, I was so interested in the advancements through your software company, Comtrac, and the work that they're doing. And I have absolutely no doubt that this will result in a massive increase in capacity of police throughout Australia if state and federal or state and territory policing are open to taking this on board. I just see it as a wonderful development. And Craig, thank you for your time here today. Thanks for the work that you've done, and I really look forward to keeping an eye on this and where it moves into in the future.
No, not at all. Thanks. I really enjoyed it.
Our guest this week was Craig Doran. His company is called Comtrac, and you can learn more about the work he does at comtrac.com.au. Join us next week for another episode of Crime Insiders Forensics. It will be in your feed early Monday morning.